Hello, my friends. Welcome back to my channel. It's me, your astrologer, Maria Di Simone. And in today's video, we are going to talk about something called interceptions. And this is a topic that is very connected to natal chart analysis. And depending on the house system that you use in your natal chart analysis, you may or may not have an interception in your chart. And I want to address this because it is a very common occurrence when you are using a quadrant house system like I use. And I use the Placidus house system primarily in my work, both in my natal chart analysis and in my predictive astrology work. If you are using an equal house system or a whole sign house system, you will not have this interception phenomenon because what is an interception? Well, basically, it is when a pair of signs are sandwiched in between two houses. They do not have their own house cusp. And when that occurs, it's always going to happen in pairs. So let's say Aries and Libra are intercepted in a horoscope. You will see that on the cusps of the whatever houses that they should be in, they're actually not. You're going to see them in the middle of those houses, and the sign before will be on the cusp instead. And those signs are actually going to be represented twice. I'm going to show you a visual of this. Don't worry. I'm going to share my screen in a minute. And I'm going to talk to you about why I believe they are important, why I think it is worth looking into. And I'm not here to convince you to use one house system over another, because the truth is, it is not this or that. You don't have to make one house system wrong in order for another one to be correct. So it's not about this or that. It is about this and that. Two things can be true at the same time. And you have to remember, guys, that astrology is a symbolic language, and symbolic languages are open to interpretation. There are some mechanics and some technical points that we all must adhere to as astrologers in order to use our system effectively. But there is room for growth and meaning and nuance. And that is why there are so many different branches of astrology. That's why there are so many different truths to astrology. So you can give me anybody's birth chart. And I promise you, you could give me that person's birth chart in the whole sign house system. You can give it to me in the Placidus house system. You could give it to me in 5 different house systems. I don't care. I am still going to find the meaning in that horoscope, and I am still going to be able to communicate meaningful horoscope analysis to the person to help them understand their astrology. One house system doesn't have to be wrong for the other to be right. Having said that, I do feel in my practice that the Placidus house system has certain advantages, especially considering the predictive methods that I employ as an astrologer. And when I'm looking at natal chart analysis, because I do consider interceptions as meaningful, I want to know if they exist. And you're not going to see them if you're looking at a chart in the whole sign house system, because the whole sign house system has everything equal. Every house is 30 degrees of equal signs. So you're going to miss that nuance if you're looking at natal chart analysis in the whole sign house system. You will also miss the nuanced house cusp degrees if you are looking at a birth chart in the whole sign house system. And I believe this is gold. And I encourage you to experiment with this on your own, be open. All of my students know that you're going to learn using the Placidus house system if you're studying through my school, the Insightful Astrology School. All house systems, all backgrounds are welcome, but when I am your instructor, I am training you on the Placidus house system for many reasons. And I discuss those reasons at length with my students at the appropriate time with specific classes. So when it comes to natal chart analysis, those intermediary house cusps, so intermediary house cusps are not the angles of the chart. The angles are the first, fourth, seventh, and 10th house. Those angles are the angular houses. The intermediary house cusps would be like the second, the third, the fifth, the sixth, the eighth, the ninth, the 11th, and 12th. Those house cusps, what degree and sign that they fall under, that they begin at, it is super important to document and to objectively track that energy, both for predictive astrology. And I'm going to do either in this video or in another video, I'll do that. But in this video, we're going to talk about rulership dynamics and how the rulership dynamics can be changed if you are using a whole sign house system versus the Placidus house system. And we're going to talk about the interceptions. So let me share my screen because I don't want this to turn into too much Maria Astro babble without you orienting yourself and seeing a chart so that I can demonstrate what I'm talking about here. And of course, if you are a student of astrology or an astrology enthusiast and you want to learn more about any branch of astrology, any type of astrology, I invite you to go check out the Insightful Astrology School over at my website, insightfulastrology.com, where I have an entire curriculum of courses, personalized instruction using your charts in the homework assignments. Classes are held on Zoom and you get access to the recordings. You don't have to attend live, but you're more than welcome to. So this particular video topic, we really talk about this in the beginner's astrology class, the introduction to astrology, and the aspects in astrology class, which is the foundational class that comes right after. And so let's look at this birth chart. This is actually the birth chart of my son, Vincent, and he's a great example, both because I have been able to objectively track his life and development to verify certain points of his, experience in bringing the astrology to life. And also because I know that it's an accurate time, right? Okay, so this is a good test example for my purposes here. So what we're going to do first is define an interception. Now, I'm going to show you here. If you look at, first I want you to look at his 11th house cusp and his 12th house cusp. And you're going to notice that they both begin with Capricorn. I want you to look at his 5th house cusp and his 6th house cusp. They both begin with Cancer. Okay. When you see an axis represented twice, so the two signs in an axis represented twice as the beginning of a house cusp, you know you're looking at a chart with an interception. Okay, that will always be true. But where's the interception? Well, what is it? What does it mean to have an interception? In between. In between this house, you see two signs, right? So when we get to his 12th house, although Capricorn's on the cusp, the entire sign of Aquarius is in his 12th house. His first house or ascendant doesn't begin until 3 degrees and change of Pisces. So Aquarius is intercepted in this horoscope. On the opposite end here, Leo is intercepted. All 30 degrees of Leo are intercepted because that 7th house cusp doesn't begin until 3 degrees of Virgo. So now you have a visual of an interception. And what that means is that the Leo Aquarius axis in his chart is intercepted. And For you, if you have an interception, it could be in any pair of signs and any houses, okay? But it's always going to be the two signs opposite. And it will always be true that if you have an interception, then another axis is going to be represented twice because it has to be in order to allow for that interception. Okay. So now let's talk about the analysis, the meaning of an interception. What does it mean to have an interception? Well, if you are a traditional astrologer, you would not assign any meaning to interceptions at all because you wouldn't be using a house system that allows for them. You would have a whole sign or an equal house system, and they just wouldn't exist. And interceptions are only possible in a quadrant house system based on the particular mathematical calculations, the latitude and longitude of the person's birth location against their birth date. So an interception, some people argue, well, it's just there because of the math. And that's how the chart is laid out. So there is no meaning behind the interception. And that is one argument. And you can certainly look at it that way. You're free to. My position is more nuanced because I feel that if we choose our birth time and our birth location and our birth circumstances, then those people who are born with an interception are choosing to be born with that interception for a spiritual reason. Maybe it is to learn something about that axis. Maybe it is to learn something important about planets that might be trapped within the intercepted signs. So that's my philosophy. And that is what I want you to remember. Intercepted signs, if there are no planets that are there in the signs intercepted, the intercepted signs might not be as important in a horoscope. In this horoscope, we have planets that are in the intercepted signs. We have the sun and moon in Leo, intercepted, and we've got Uranus and Neptune in Aquarius, intercepted. So in this horoscope, we have 4 planets that are in signs that are intercepted, which suggests there is a certain amount of trapped energy here because Leo and Aquarius are trapped signs. They don't have their own opening, their own house cusp. So they have nowhere to direct the energy in a focused way. When you have planets that are intercepted, they struggle. They are really on the struggle bus because they don't have an easy direct outlet and path, and they overcompensate. They have to overcompensate in order to be seen, heard, felt, expressed. And depending on the aspects that your intercepted planets make to the rest of the birth chart, that can become quite difficult. And expressing that energy can become a really big part of the person's life, and it can come out in a not so easy way. And I'll give you one example. Uranus is intercepted. What is Uranus? The planet of liberation, the planet of independent, of doing things my way, non-tradition. And so there's this trapped energy of Uranus functioning in my son's chart, but Uranus is also opposite both his sun and his moon. And that's traditionally a very rebellious type of an energy, right? But it's intercepted. So what does that mean? Does it mean that the rebellious type of energy here with this opposition won't manifest? No. It actually means it's manifesting on steroids. Because in this case, the trapped energy of the sun and moon in Leo that is striving to be seen and heard, opposite that Uranus intercepted, is saying there's a a greater sense of urgency to try to find a way to express that uniqueness, that sense of autonomy, that sense of rebelliousness and progressive energy. And it's going to do it in a disjointed way because there's no easy outlet. There is no easy path. And it can be to the person's detriment. You can have entire conversations with your clients, with your friends, with your family about their experiences of their intercepted planets. And I am telling you guys, be objective, be my little astrology mad scientists, and just study this for yourself. Pull up a few birth charts that have interceptions, people in your life that you know, and ask them how that energy may or may not struggle to be recognized in or received in a positive way, directed in a positive way, supportive way. It's pretty interesting. Okay, so that is one advantage to using a Placidus house system or a quadrant house system. You could use the Koch, Porphyry. Okay, some people even use Regiomontanus for natal analysis these days. Any of them, I'm fine with any of them. And you're not going to get too far off in your degrees. You're going to have some interesting nuanced house cusps, and you may have interceptions with these house systems. But the other thing I wanted to show you is that when you are using the Placidus house system, you are no longer going to have equal houses. The sign is not going to be 0 degrees at the beginning of the cusp. So in this example, the second house cusp is 20 degrees Aries, 16 minutes. If we were using the whole sign house system, that would turn to 0 degrees. Okay. Why is this important to track? Well, look at these house cusps. Now, we're not going to focus so much on the angles because the angles, you're going to have those degrees in the whole sign house system. The 10th house cusp here is the midheaven in the Placidus house system. You would have that midheaven degree floating either in the 10th or the 9th, sometimes the 11th. You'll be able to find those degrees. So I'm not focusing on the angles. I'm focusing on the intermediary house cusps now. This is such gold, so important to pay attention to and to track. What am I talking about here? This is a concept called rulership dynamics. Now, we talk about this extensively in my aspects class. You really learn how to think astrologically for yourself. Registration's open for that class now. So if you are interested, go and get your spot to that class. We talk about this a little bit in my introduction to astrology class as well, because without rulership dynamics, your analysis falls apart. And here is something so interesting. Now, especially if you have an interception, your rulership dynamics are going to look a little bit different than they might if you were in the whole sign house system. For example, let's start with the Pisces rising. If this were the whole sign house system, 0 degrees Aries would be on the second house cusp, 0 degrees Taurus on the third, 0 degrees Gemini, 4th, 0 degree Cancer on the 5th, and then 0 degree Leo would be here on the 6th. So you see how we have a big difference here? So according to the whole sign house system, Leo would be on the cusp of the 6th house here, not Cancer. And that would make the sun the ruler of the 6th house based on rulership dynamics. What I am saying is that I'm using a different system. Cancer is on the cusp of the 6th house, and that makes the moon the ruler of the 6th house, not the sun. And when you have an interception, I don't worry about that they are co-ruling the house. They're trapped. It's trapped energy. So yeah, it's true technically that it is co-ruling the house, But we're not focusing on that for our rulership dynamics. The moon rules the sixth house, period. Over here at the 11th house, Saturn rules the 11th house. Saturn would also rule the 12th house. I mean, that would actually be even if Aquarius was on the cusp there. So, this is another nuanced detail that you will only get if you're using a quadrant house system. And that becomes very interesting and it becomes really relevant when we are looking to inform us about those house topics. So for my son, for example, sixth house matters. The moon informs us of sixth house matters. And that gives a little bit of different information for our natal chart analysis. Now, okay, you know what? I think I'm going to do this. I think I'm going to go ahead and make this all one video. I was going to do two separate videos, but I'm going to keep going. We're going to keep with this theme now. So we just talked about natal chart analysis, rulership dynamics, interceptions. This is all just food for thought. Remember, YouTube videos cannot give you the full plethora of knowledge. You need to study astrology in a proper way. Read some books, take classes, get some instruction, and have that feedback with a mentor. That's the best way to learn anything. So this is just giving you tidbits of information to open you up to the topic. Now we're going to talk about the benefit of using the Placidus house system in predictive astrology, specifically when we are working with transits and secondary progressions. Now, I know a lot of astrologers use the whole sign house system working with transits. And in that method, as soon as a planet enters a sign, it enters that new house. I don't make my predictions based on that. And here's why. Those house cusps. We're going back to the intermediary house cusps. And you're going to take your astrology journals and you're going to track this for yourself over time. And it's going to take some time. You're going to need a good 2 years, maybe longer, before you can objectively speak to this. Okay? So if you've never tracked your stuff with an astrology journal before, you cannot form an opinion on this until you have allowed a certain amount of time to pass. In the next example chart that I'm going to put up my chart, and I'm going to show you what I mean when 3 planets transited through house cusps. Okay, so let me put up my chart again. This time it's going to be, so it's actually going to be my chart. So that's my chart. I have to share that again. Sorry, guys. Hopefully, yep. Okay, there. Now we're looking at my chart for this next example, and we're focusing on transits. Now, this is predictive astrology, so we just switched from natal chart analysis to predictive astrology. And again, the whole point of this video is why use the Placidus house system. These are the strengths. This is why I basically am a huge fan of it. So the intermediary house cusps, to reiterate, are not going to be 0 degrees of a sign. In the whole sign house system, it would be 0 degrees Taurus. In the Placidus, it is 28 degrees 51 minutes Taurus, begins my second house. Third house would begin 0 degrees Gemini. It begins 22 degrees 26 minutes of Gemini based on this birth time, so on and so forth, okay? We are going to be looking at 3 houses in particular, all of them intermediary, and we're going to talk about the transiting planets and what objectively happened when these transiting planets entered the house. And I say all the time that when a transiting planet, especially an outer planet or Mars, leaves one house cusp and enters one house and enters another, it's going to make some noise and you're going to hear it. You're going to feel it. It's going to be a visceral reaction in your life and your life story. So here we have 28 degrees, 51 minutes of Taurus. And we are going to talk about what happened as transiting Uranus ingressed into my second house. So at the moment of this video, Uranus is in Gemini at 0 degrees Gemini. So it's in my second house now, but it moved into my second house for the first time on June 4th of this year. That is when it passed 28 degrees, 51 minutes of Taurus, and it entered my second house, starting to make some noise. And you're going to use an orb of influence of, a degree and change, maybe 2 degrees, because remember, birth time can be variable. It is very possible that I was born a couple of minutes earlier or a couple of minutes later, to be fair. I do believe it was a couple of minutes earlier, but you want that orb of influence and you want to track what happens during the week, 2 weeks, when it's an outer planet like Uranus, a slow moving planet. You can give it up to 2 weeks for sure. What happened? What kind of noise is being made? And the noise that was made was very clear. Uranus going into the second house, traditional delineation would be sudden change with earnings, how I make money, how I use my talents and abilities. That sudden change, that sudden reversal or change could be positive, could be difficult. We don't know because we're not looking at what else Uranus by transit is attaching to in the birth chart. All we know is that Uranus is ready to shake up my second house. And around June 4th, when this ingress happened, the noise was being made. But what happened? What kind of noise? Well, my friends, just a few days before this June 4th time period, on May 27th, I launched my brand new website. And even though I've had an astrology business and website for 20 years, it needed to be completely redone. And all of the technology was upgraded, Uranus. All of the systems got a big upgrade, huge. Software, the back end, technology, everything. And what that did was innovate Uranus the way I can make money and how I can deliver my talents and abilities and products and all of that. And that was so appropriate for Uranus ingressing into my second house. If I were using the whole sign house system, I would have missed that transit entirely. I would not be saying that Uranus entered my second house on June 4th, 2025. I would have said, oh, wait, Uranus entered my second house way, way back in 2018. And that would not objectively fit with the very specific event that I just told you happened. June 4th, May 27th, the website got launched. And now there are all of these innovative systems in place that allow me to make money and use my talents and abilities and deliver products in different ways. Okay. So that's just one transit. The next transit I want to talk to you about is a Jupiter transit. Jupiter ingressed into my third house. It passed 22 degrees Gemini, 26 minutes, on May 3rd of this year. And what was I doing around May 3rd of this year? Well, I was furiously putting all of the finishing touches on the new website and giving my new website administrator everything she needed, reimagining my entire school, all of the multimedia on my website. We were finishing all of that up because again, on May 27th, the website got launched. So orb of influence, guys, Jupiter crossed into my third house of communications, writing, teaching, speaking. What does Jupiter rule? It would rule the advanced school, divination learning. Phenomenal. Phenomenal, accurate energy. And if I looked at this through the whole sign house system, then I'd be looking at when Jupiter entered 0 degrees, not 22 and change. And I would have missed out on a very nuanced predictive point, which is why I am a huge fan of the Placidus house system. These intermediary house cusps give you gold when you are looking at your astrology through this lens. So do this for yourself. If you are my student, I guide you, I help you, I teach you how to do all this. We work, we play. It's amazing. It's so much fun to really look at this. And so Jupiter would have entered the third house the end of May of 2024 using the whole sign house system. Nothing happened that was significant, objectively speaking. And I know this because I track things in an astrology journal routinely. The meat and potatoes here really, these two transits, Uranus and Jupiter, very much coincided with my new website and the launch and the new systems and communications. Now there's another transit I'm going to talk to you about, and this one wasn't so good. This one was recent. So I'm going to talk to you about a Mars transit. And Mars transits are really, really easy for you to track because in about 2 years, you're going to be able to go through your whole chart and you're going to be able to see what happens. And, a Jupiter transit's going to expand, right? Expand, growth, opportunities. Uranus is going to shake things up, revolutionize. Well, what is a Mars transit going to do? Mars is going to aggravate, inflame. It is going to make something happen quickly. That's the essence of Mars. So Mars crossed my sixth house cusp of illness on July 1st. Today's July 9th. And again, we have to give this little orb of influence because the house cusps are very sensitive. And if you're off by your birth time a couple of minutes, you have to allow for that wiggle room. Well, you probably haven't seen me do a lot of videos here in the past 2.5 weeks or so. And that is because towards the end of June, I started to have an autoimmune flare up. And this is the third time that this happened since 2018, actually. And basically, what happens is I have a very large goiter here. I have Hashimoto's, and it's a very large goiter, and it is pressing towards my esophagus, but it's not blocking anything yet. And basically, I got sick with a cold after my Seattle trip, the end of May. After I get sick, it takes me a little bit longer to recover, and my body attacks the weak parts. That's what happens for all of us. The weak part for me is my throat, my thyroid. And this is just medical astrology. Sixth house cusp has Virgo there. Virgo is ruled by my Mercury in Taurus. And so we know that the thyroid, the neck, the throat, communications, all of that's going to be a really delicate area, and breathing issues there with Mercury. So what happens is I had an inflammatory response where it becomes very hard for me to talk for long periods of time without coughing because I breathe in the air. I try to talk, and the level of inflammation and the swollen glands and everything else, it's so much that I just cough, and the coughing creates more irritation, inflammation, and it's a vicious cycle, and it turns into a whole disaster. So what happened was on June 27th. So remember, I said July 1st is when Mars entered the sixth house. On June 27th, I said this is getting so bad now, this cough, this issue. I was starting to feel like someone was squeezing the back of my lungs, like literally like this. And I said, it's time to go see the pulmonologist, go to the doctors, do what I have to do, like I did the other two times, and intervene before this becomes debilitating. Because the two other times that this happened, it had gotten to the point of me actually not being able to work and talk for an extended period of time. So I was afraid that that's where it was going. And I wanted to intervene as quickly as I could to try not to let that happen. So on June 27th, I went to my pulmonologist just to make sure that the lungs were okay. It's not a lung issue. My lungs are fine. It's complete voice box bronchial. This is an ENT thyroid issue. But what happened was on June 27th, I agreed to take 12 days of prednisone. The reason why I agreed is because I knew that I needed to get this inflammation down quickly and I needed some extra help. My body was weak. I was really on that slippery slope, and I needed to talk. I need to talk. If I can't talk, I can't work. Sixth house, right? Can't talk, can't work. And I was limiting talking to about an hour to an hour and a half a day, only for clients and for teaching my classes. And I stopped doing videos for a little bit, and all the extras had to go by the wayside so I could rest my voice as much as possible. So on July 1st, as Mars inflammation enters the sixth house, I'm now on prednisone. I am now actively fighting this inflammation, this issue. And you couldn't have gotten that if we focused on when Mars entered Virgo, because Mars entered Virgo on June 17th. Now, to be fair, I was sick the end of May, and then this thing started to brew. But the inflammatory response, the level of it getting so bad that I actually had to go to the doctor, that didn't happen June 17th when Mars entered Virgo. That was not even on my radar. I was busy doing, a lot of work, all of that. No, it was June 27th that I said, okay, it's time. I have to go to the pulmonologist. I have to assertively intervene here. And on July 1st, Mars enters the sixth house. And what does it do immediately? Transiting Mars is going to immediately engage in my birth chart into a square with Neptune. And Neptune, what does Neptune rule? Autoimmune response. I knew that the inflammation, Mars, was going to get to like a peak difficulty because Mars was going to square my Neptune and then my moon, which rules the physical body. And then it was going to oppose Jupiter. So what I did was I looked at all of this and I said, okay, I know this is going to last a certain amount of time, and I know it's going to get better once Mars passes all of these squares and oppositions. And in the interim, I am going to actively choose to rest my voice and take prednisone, even though I hate any kind of medication, especially something like prednisone. It was not a decision that I, lightly made for a lot of reasons, but I felt like I needed to do that in this case. And now Mars is past the opposition in the squares and it's moving to make a trine to my sun sign. So vitality is returning now. But again, the whole point of this, now it's a long video, this is the real life astrology long learning video, is to help you see that by tracking your transits using the Placidus house system objectively, you get to see these dates and you get to see the correlations for major life events. You're going to miss that if you are using the whole sign house system. You are not going to get that same information because the dates are just not going to be the same. I hope this video gave you guys some food for thought. I hope this was informative, enlightening, entertaining, helpful. Let me know in the comments, students of astrology, okay? There was a lot covered here, but I basically gave you in this video the main reasons why I am a huge proponent of using the Placidus house system in natal chart analysis and in my predictive work. All right, guys, see you next time. Bye.